According to statistics, the US leads the way when it comes to the number of serial killers in a single country. Of course, such criminals are active all across the world, but the good news is their numbers have been declining since the 1980s. There are certainly far fewer serial slayers today than there were over 4 decades ago, but that's not to say they don't exist entirely. Join us for this video as we examine the cases of 3 serial killers who were only just identified. Heather Presdee was born on August 28, 1982, and grew up with one younger sibling. Little has been documented about her early life, but between 2003 and 2004, she attended the community college of Allegheny County in Pennsylvania while attempting to gain her nursing degree, but dropped out before she completed it. She subsequently spent 14 years as a veterinary technician at the Pittsburgh Veterinary Specialty and Emergency Center, where she stated that she provided critical care to animals, including administering anesthesia and carrying out euthanasia. Between 2016 and 2018, however, Presdee returned to university, where she obtained her nursing degree. Over the following years, she worked at 12 different nursing facilities where she carried out the care of elderly and vulnerable individuals. According to reports, however, Presdee's conduct was called into question shortly after she began her nursing career. Between October 2018 and April of 2019, she worked at Encompass Health Rehabilitation of Harmarville, where she was disciplined for administering insulin outside of a physician's orders. She met with superiors afterwards, and a corrective action plan was put into place. While one supervisor told investigators that she believed Presdee was harming residents and took actions internally, the results of this action are unclear. Between April and September of 2019, Presdee worked at Allegheny Valley Hospital, and afterwards she went on to work at Platinum Ridge Center for Rehabilitation in Brackenridge. Detectives noted that included on her CV were fake names for her references and a phone number which belonged to a relative. Presdee then worked at Concordia at Rebecca Residencies in West Deer, where she would later be linked to one patient death, but it was her time at Bel Air Health, which started in April of 2021, that drew the most suspicion. After a 4th patient died under her watch, Presdee's co-workers went to their superiors. Presdee was briefly suspended, but an internal investigation which followed concluded that there was no identifiable evidence. In May 2023, Presdee was charged with killing 2 patients and injuring a 3rd. The Attorney General confirmed in a statement that the 40-year-old had been charged with 2 counts of homicide, 1 count of attempted murder, 1 count of aggravated assault, 3 counts of neglect of a care-dependent person, and 3 counts of reckless endangerment. The 2 murder victims were 55-year-old James Bartow and 83-year-old Joseph Campbell, both of whom died in December of 2022. Presdee came to the attention of investigators initially when a concerned relative made a complaint to the Bureau of Narcotics Investigation and Drug Control, stating that Presdee was involved in the improper administration of insulin while working at Quality Life Service. It was soon discovered that she had a pattern of being investigated for similar incidents and abusive behavior towards patients and/or staff, which led her to either resigning or being fired from her previous jobs. It was also established that the two men who died had been in her care at the time of their deaths, which were both proven to have been caused by an overdose of insulin. In November, further charges against Presdee were announced when she admitted to investigators that she had tried to kill 19 different people at various health centres in which she had worked at. Included in her admissions were Presdee's claims that one victim looked at her like an animal would, while another had no quality of life. Others, she stated, she felt bad for. Another needed to die. 17 people are confirmed to have died whilst in her care. The new charges against Presdee included 17 counts of attempted murder, 2 counts of first-degree murder, and 19 counts of neglect of a care-dependent person. Prosecutors noted that she was only charged with first-degree murder in cases where physical evidence was available. According to investigators, she typically administered the insulin during overnight shifts when there was less staff around. If the victim survived the dose, she would reportedly attempt to kill them before they could be hospitalized by either giving them a secondary dose or using an air embolism. Her victims ranged from between the ages of 43 and 104. In order to avoid the death penalty, Presdee pleaded guilty to 3 counts of first-degree murder. On May 2, 2024, she was given 3 consecutive life sentences, plus between 380 and 760 years on top. She told the court, "I'm very sorry. I'm sorry for what I've done." However, reporters observed that she refused to look at any of the relatives of her victims as they read their testimonies aloud in court. She is currently imprisoned at State Correction Institution Muncie in Clinton Township, Pennsylvania. Nikolai Agayev was born on May 1, 1974, in Kurgan, Russia. Though little is documented about his youth, most reports agree that his life of crime began at least in the early 2000s, when he would regularly participate in robberies and burglarize homes. Such offences turned violent, such as one robbery in 2003, which saw him charged and convicted of assault. In 2006, he was still imprisoned following that conviction, as well as one for robbery. And it was here that he would carry out his first known murder when he killed his cellmate. As a result, 16 years were added to his original sentence. In October 2017, he was transferred to another prison, but in the summer of the following year, he was released on parole for good behaviour. He subsequently moved from Kurgan to Yekaterinburg, and since he had nowhere to live, he became a vagrant. Agayev's first murder outside of prison took place on August 17, 2018, when he went to the home of an elderly woman he'd met the day before. He arrived at the residence late at night, at around 10:40 p.m. As he entered the residence, he immediately attacked the woman, knocking her to the floor. He subsequently took her by the neck and choked her before he struck her at least 11 times on the head. Agayev stole 13,000 rubles from her home before fleeing the scene. In the following weeks, he moved to Chelyabinsk in order to avoid being discovered by the police and committed numerous robberies, often at night and against food vendors. A metal adjustable wrench was Agayev's weapon of choice, which he would use to strike the vendors before opening the register and stealing their money. He later told investigators that he preferred the wrench because if he was caught with it, he could explain it away by claiming to be a construction worker, and that the wrench was simply part of his toolkit. The first victim of such an assault was a woman selling fruit on Kirov Street. He tore off her apron, which contained 14,000 rubles, before making his escape. Though several witnesses saw him running from the scene, Agayev threatened them with a hammer he was carrying, scaring them off. On September the 8th, he attacked an employee at a fruit and vegetable store, hitting her 5 times with his wrench until she collapsed on the ground. He subsequently stole food and other items before leaving. A few days later, he struck again, this time targeting a woman working at a cigarette kiosk. She suffered severe injuries following the attack, including a fractured arm and a fracture at the base of her skull. Following this assault, investigators ramped up their search for the perpetrator, and Agayev fled to Kamensk-Uralsky. On September the 11th, 2018, Agayev made friends with a 36-year-old man while hanging around outside a store. He soon accepted a drink from the man, and the two purchased a bottle of vodka before heading back to the man's apartment. For several hours they drank together, but eventually Agayev decided to rob the man, who lived with his wife and 10-year-old stepdaughter, though his wife was working the night shift. At one point he was asked to leave, which is when Agayev opted to strike. He struck the man at least 3 times on the head with his wrench, believing he'd killed him, and then sexually abused the man's stepdaughter. While neighbours heard odd noises coming from the apartment, they failed to notify the police. One neighbour recalled, "I was watching TV, and at about 9:30 in the evening, I started to hear stomping. I heard 2 male voices. Then I heard something falling. After he was finished abusing the little girl, he took her into the bathroom, ran the water, and drowned her in the bathtub." Agayev then stole 19,000 rubles from the home before fleeing. In the following days, Agayev left the area and returned to Chelyabinsk, but investigators were soon on his trail. The man he believed he'd killed had only been knocked unconscious, and he told the authorities everything he knew after his wife arrived home and found him on the floor. Investigators then looked at CCTV footage from the store and discovered Agayev's image, promptly putting him on the wanted list. His crimes became highly publicized. Just a few days after that, he was captured at a railway station. While in custody, he admitted to all of his crimes, including the other murder he'd committed after his release from prison. Though Agayev was said to have been motivated by sheer greed, as all he did was steal money from people, it has been noted that much of what he stole were scraps, enough to get him food and booze for the day, but little more. On September the 18th, 2019, Agayev, 44, was convicted on various charges, including the sexual assault and murder of the 10-year-old girl. He was ultimately sentenced to life in prison. 5 years later, in 2024, he struck his cellmate 39 times with a piece of cement, an attack that surprised prison staff who had not had any issues with Agayev since he was sentenced. The cellmate was rushed to hospital but died from his wounds. Agayev claimed that he'd killed his cellmate simply because he disliked him. On December the 12th, he was convicted of this murder and given a second life sentence. Raul Mesa Jr. was born on October 14, 1950, in Travis County, Texas. By all accounts, he is no stranger to crime. By the age of 8, he started participating in drug use, and 5 years later, at the age of 13, he was arrested for the first time and charged with shoplifting and burglary. 1 year later, he was accused of arson, and in 1975, aged just 15, he carried out the robbery of a convenience store in Austin, Texas, in which he non-fatally shot a store employee. He was given 20 years for the crime, but was released early, in February of 1981. Less than a year after he was released from prison, Mesa committed his most infamous crime. On January the 3rd, 1982, 8-year-old Kendra Page disappeared. She was last seen riding her bike around Langford Elementary School in Austin. Hours later, her body was recovered from a dumpster behind the school building. She was naked and covered in injuries, with investigators later determining that she had been sexually assaulted and strangled to death. Just 3 days after the horrific scene was discovered, Mesa walked into a police station and confessed to carrying out the crime. In order for him to avoid the death penalty, he and his lawyer arranged a plea deal in which he would plead guilty and receive 30 years in prison. Despite the cruel and violent nature of his crime, however, Mesa never served the entire 30-year sentence. Instead, he was released after little more than a decade in 1993 for good behaviour. His release outraged locals and prompted the media to question Mesa, who stated at a news conference, "I can only tell you that in my heart, I know I will not willfully bring harm to anyone again." Though he declared that he was a born-again Christian and that he'd served his time and paid his debt to society, locals did not believe him, and he was subsequently forced out of the community. He would later be chased out of 5 other cities. 1 year later, he was returned to prison after violating his midnight curfew. He remained in prison until 2002. For years after his 2002 release, it seemed that Mesa was living an ordinary life. However, in 2023, he would wind up confessing to several unsolved murders. On May 9th, 2019, a 65-year-old woman named Gloria Lofton was discovered dead in her home by one of her children. Investigators discovered blood in the hallway and on her pillow, while a used condom was recovered from the kitchen. While a swab was taken from Gloria's body, an inconclusive autopsy led investigators to rule the case as an alcohol-related incident, and the swab was not initially tested. The medical examiner listed the cause and manner of her death as undetermined, despite evidence that she may have died from strangulation. For several years, the case was unsolved. Meanwhile, in 2021, Mesa moved in with 80-year-old Jesse Franger, a retired Travis County probation officer who'd become friends with the killer following his 1993 release. According to reports, the Frager family were motivated by religion to invite Mesa into their lives and extended a helping hand. He soon began attending Bible studies with them, and they helped to secure not just somewhere for him to live, but employment too, after he left prison. A few years after Mesa moved in with Jesse, however, the elderly man's wife and son passed away from COVID-19 shortly afterwards. He agreed to move out of the home, and a moving date was set for May 12th, 2023. 8 days later, on May 20th, authorities turned up at Jesse's home after they'd received a request for a welfare check from his niece. The elderly man's body was discovered in a bathroom closet, while a large amount of blood was found in the home, as well as a bloodied kitchen knife. Investigators soon discovered that Jesse had a Ring doorbell, and camera footage showed Mesa getting into Jesse's truck on May 13th, the day after he was due to move out. The truck was later recovered on May 22nd in the 12,000 block of Interstate 35 in Austin. Inside the vehicle was a pair of bloodied boots. Mesa's own car, meanwhile, had been left on Jesse's driveway. It contained duct tape, gloves, a hammer, and a hatchet. On May 26th, less than a week after Jesse's body was found, Mesa called Austin police and asked to speak with a homicide detective. During this call, he told investigators that he was responsible not just for Jesse Frager's demise, but for that of Gloria Lofton 4 years earlier. The exact motivations behind the murders are unclear, however. Mesa claimed that he and Jesse were in some kind of romantic relationship and that he became frustrated and mad and killed the elderly man. It doesn't appear that there is any evidence to support the idea that the two had a relationship. However, as for Gloria, he alleged that he'd been promised 25% of the money Gloria's nephew would inherit, but her daughter noted that Gloria had no nephews. Notably, police discovered in 2020 that Mesa's DNA matched that which was recovered from Gloria's body, and yet nothing was done about this information, prompting understandable outrage from her children. Mesa also admitted during this call that he'd also carried out a double homicide in San Antonio, which he has not been convicted of to this day. The detective who spoke on the phone with him, Patrick Reed, stated, "He was giving dates and locations, so we were trying to just corroborate the dates, locations, names that he would provide, and tried to narrow down the timeline. The phone call lasted 14 minutes. 3 days later, Mesa was arrested in North Austin. Authorities noted that he was carrying a bag containing duct tape, zip ties, ammunition, and a handgun. They believed that he may have been planning to carry out further murders, and Mesa confirmed their suspicions by telling them that he was ready and prepared to kill again. In September of 2024, Mesa pleaded guilty to both charges laid against him: the murder of Jesse Frager and capital murder with the intent to commit sexual assault regarding Gloria Lofton. He stated, "I'm pleading guilty because I am guilty." When asked if he was apologetic about his crimes, he replied, "I think it's too late. What's the use if a person will not accept it?" He later waived his right to appeal and was given life in prison without parole. Investigators speculate that he could be responsible for as many as 10 other homicides and numerous sexual assaults after 2016, when his supervised release ended. In October 2024, authorities noted that they had sent items of evidence from 4 cases away for testing so that they could determine whether or not Mesa was involved.